Portugal is amazing. It's just it has a whole bunch of history. It's one of the oldest nations in Europe, and it used to be one of the biggest empires in Europe. Like, after they had lots of fighting with Spain, lots of times they were joined with Spain, but when Portugal was itself, it was one of the biggest powers in Europe, which is really amazing considering how small it is. They had colonies in Africa, they had colonies in South America, of course, with Brazil, and the biggest thing that they feel national pride for is the age of exploration in Portugal. They were so proud of their ancestors who went out and tried to do new things that no one had ever thought before. The first person to go underneath Africa was actually the first European to go under Africa was a Portuguese sailor, and so that's one of those historic figures that Portuguese feel a lot of national pride in. Besides their empire explorations, you have all of the older histories, such as the Moors' invasion of Europe. They came in through Spain and through Portugal, and they took almost all of Portugal, and then Portuguese had to fight back to get the rest and to get all of their territories back. And because of that, there's so many monuments. There's castles in almost every area you're going to find. There's going to be ancient ruins in a lot of them. I've explored Roman ruins in Portugal, and there was even in one area there was a Roman temple that is really cool. But the history of Portugal is an amazing thing, from a long time ago to more recently, when they had kind of a dictatorship with Salazar, who you could still see the influence that Salazar had on the culture of Portugal today, because a lot of the older generation kind of was oppressed in their education. You find a lot of older people that have never seen a Bible in their lives. You find older people that don't even know how to read. And it's just very interesting to see how Portugal went through that period of Salazar, who was a dictator who kind of oppressed them, and now they're growing into a more modern country. They're full of very amazing people, and yeah, Portugal is it's an amazing country. The main difference whenever I got there was how much they favor chicken and pork over beef. Like, I grew up in a family that was a very beef-eating family. My dad is a cow vet, and so we'd eat beef almost every meal. In Portugal, beef is more expensive than pork or chicken, and so you're going to be having a lot of pork and a lot of chicken and a lot of rice dishes. They really, one of their main things in cuisine is to cook things and put it on top of rice. There are some random dishes that when you first see it, you think like, what the heck is that? Where they get like maybe like a hamburger patty or a chicken thing, and they just set it on a plate with rice, French fries, and like some lettuce to make a salad. And that's a very simple dish that you're going to see a lot in Portugal. Another big difference is their bread. Portuguese have amazing bread. There are very few places in the United States where you can find bread as good as the common bread in Portugal. It's just whenever you get it freshly baked out of a padaria, it's like one of the most amazing things. And then they have the pastries there. Like, you always think of France or something as as having really good pastries. I think of Portugal now because I've tried a lot of their cakes, I've tried a lot of their pastries, and they're just some of the best things I've ever had. There's this one area that I served in that's famous for this one specific cake made at one specific cafe that everyone knows about. And so every day at 11 and at 5, there's giant lines out of this little pasteleria, which is when they finish baking everything. That's the times whenever they come out of the ovens. And so there's giant lines down the street for these they're like little balls that have an egg cream filling inside, and it's wrapped in cinnamon sugar. They're called bolos de Berlim. Like, everyone knows about it, and they're just some of the most delicious pastries I've ever had. And I brought my companions up to it. They've had the same cake made at other places, and they're like, I don't know, I've had lots of different opportunities to have this cake. I don't think it's going to be the greatest I've ever had. And then they take it from this one cafe and they eat it, and they're like, this is really the best one I've ever had. Their pastries are just really good. And one thing that they point out a lot between us and our food and Portuguese food is our food is a lot sweeter. like our bread is sweeter, and especially our desserts are sweeter. You bring them brownies and they love brownies, and you bring them like cookies and they love American cookies just because it's so much sweeter, because we use a lot more sugar where they use a lot more flour. The Portuguese food is really, really good, and being in Portugal you also get to eat a lot of African food, which is really, really good. Like Cape Verde has some delicious dishes that I had a few times, and you have Brazilian food, which is really, really good. You kind of get a little taste of that whenever you go to like Tucanos or Rodízios or something like that. But Brazilian food is a lot of meats and rice platters and stuff like that. The food there is just amazing. Anyone who likes to eat, they're gonna love Portugal. Portugal has an amazing history, and you could see all kinds of historic things in every area that you go to. In many of my areas had actual castles inside the areas that you could go around. You could walk around the castle walls. You could explore the castle ruins if it happens to be in ruin or if it happens to be all built. You'd also see amazing Catholic cathedrals that you walk inside and you're just amazed at how they built this, especially considering how old it is. Portugal has some amazing architecture like everywhere within like Catholic, their Catholic cathedrals or their castles, any of their historic buildings really, and you're actively trying to understand the Portuguese people and learn more about their history, and it's really important to them that you try to learn about their history. And there's so many things that you could do. Like, there are some surprising things. There are a few areas where you could find Roman ruins that you just drive out to them and you're just walking on kind of like the foundations or some old pillars of some old Roman cities from way back when the Romans had their empire. And there was one area that had the ruins of an actual Roman temple in the middle of the city, and so you're just walking through and then you pass through this one opening in the buildings, and then there's this giant Roman temple with all its pillars, and it was really, really cool. The Portuguese they have a very distinct culture, but also within their boundaries there's all the cultures from all the colonies, or people from all the colonies. You have Brazilian culture, you have the cultures from all the countries in Africa, and it really makes, like, you could see so many cultures in this one little country. But serving in the north, I was in a mostly Portuguese area. There were very few Brazilians, very few Africans, and so I got to see a lot more of the Portuguese culture. And the Portuguese culture is very related to the Catholic religion. They have many, many holidays that relate to Catholic saints. They have holidays that I've never even heard of, like there's St. John's Day and St. Peter's Day, where they have individual cities that celebrate a certain saint on a certain day, where all the work stops on that day and they just celebrate for that whole day. They have like parades, they have things like that, and it's a really cool thing to see. And the Portuguese people, they care a lot about eating habits and stuff like that, and so one thing I could suggest to someone who's serving in Portugal is to practice your eating. They consider you with more respect if you eat, with like a fork in your left hand and a knife in your right hand. If you eat like that, they'll respect you a lot more than most Americans who eat with one fork in one hand and they use the fork to cut things and they use the fork to scoop things. They like it whenever you have a fork in one hand and you use the knife to move things onto the fork. I really like a lot of their ties with a lot of their history. They have lots of holidays that relate to certain events in their cities or in their country, and there's lots of cities that have their own individual holidays. One that I can remember is in this one city, Viana do Castelo. They had a festival during summer. There was I can't remember the name of the actual festival, but they have lots of activities throughout the week. They decorate the entire city to look like sort of medieval-ish. They have parades that go through. They have giant paper mache heads that just go around the city, and it was a really cool festival to just kind of walk through with your companion. You get to see a lot of the culture of Portugal, and you get to see a lot of their history because they celebrate their history. They're really into remembering what has happened in the past and like trying to remember it so you could do the same things that they did in the past. our district decided to go to this one table that's in the Portuguese wilderness. It's a table where 4 kings in different kingdoms used to come together to meet. And so it was supposed to be on the corner of their 4 kingdoms. There's like seats on each of them, and we were like, let's go to this and let's go eat lunch on this ancient table of kings. And so we went to the city, we took a bus out to another random city, and when we got there we found that we missed the other connection bus that we needed to. And so I was like, okay, let's go to the kind of like the flea market that they have there. I hadn't been to one before, and so I wanted to go to that. But my companions, they looked at the phone that had like a GPS, and they were like, you know what, that city that has the trailhead, that's only like 20 kilometers away or something like that. The phone says we could get there in 30 minutes, which is when the next bus would be getting here. And so they're like, okay, let's go, let's just walk it. And so we started walking, and then about halfway to the city, we get to where the road ends and it's just a mountain. And then we realized that our phone settings had it so that it'll take you to the closest road and then cut across. And so the way the path had it, we had to climb over a mountain and then down the other side. It's still one of the best memories of my mission, just because it was so funny realizing that when we were in the middle of nowhere, we had to climb across a mountain to get to this little town that had the trailhead. And so we had to climb up, and then we found the trailhead, we went to that table, and then we found there weren't buses all the way back to the other town, and so we had to walk all the way back. We walked like 25 kilometers that day. It's one of the funniest things of my mission.